a couple of matching friends down in the garage.
The joys of having space.
Yes, the joys of having cheap electricity. Yay, Quebec.
Mhm. Nice, nice. All right. So I saw that Javier kicked off the live stream. Thank you very much, Javier. Gonna skip over introductions because I think everyone's been here before and move on to release planning and updates. I know Natalie's going to join us later, but she said she'd be late today. So I don't see anyone from the implementation team who can keep updates there. So maybe we'll skip right to platform, Javier.
All right. Yeah. So let's see. What are we working on? PAC is sort of scheduled for a release. We had an RC sent out last week. We are working on delivery pipelines specifically for Linux. So we're trying to get that all squared away before we can actually ship this. And then we did get a report that we're investigating on Windows that we'd also like to get taken care of to make sure that our pipelines are nice and healthy on that side.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I think that's probably it. I don't see distribution team here, but also I don't think there's any plans to ship updates to the registry or anything soon. So moving on to our first agenda item here today, user-provided processes in a post-shell world. So I threw this on here because we are working on rolling out the implementation of this RFC. Let me share it for a second here. And while there is a lot of detail in this original RFC about migration steps for build pack authors and migration steps for platform authors dealing with the removal of the .profile functionality, I think the one thing we probably did not flesh out, and we should have, is the migration steps for users that are sort of providing the process on the fly at the last minute. So right now we have a special syntax for sort of indicating that you're creating a direct process, but the default is to do a batch evaluated process. I think you wouldn't want that to be the case here. It would always be a direct process, but moving from like our double dash syntax to not that would be like a change for the user interface. So I just wanted to work with this group to sort of talk through the migration steps here. One of the things I think I'd like to propose is that, or a question for the group, would we like to retain the same behavior in the case where the two dashes are still being passed? I feel like that could, it'd be like, it's a direct process either way, but it could limit sort of the breaking changes on the user side. That's sort of the upside of that. The downside of that is the fact that we chose that syntax does have some limitations. It doesn't let you, I don't know in what case you'd be starting your process with a double dash in the real world, but there are some like limitations to what you could do there. And then, so it's like, do we want to remove this thing totally that's ugly, or do we want to provide compatibility in this case? And then sort of how do we want to roll out the changes? I feel like the easiest option would be when the platform changes the platform API, that also changes this interface for all users using that platform. But I wanted to talk that through sort of with platform authors to make it clear that that sort of platform API upgrade would carry through all the way to users. We've sort of done process like launcher interface changes like that in the past. But it's always unfortunate when the platform API changes leak through to users in that way. I'm not sure what the other options are, other than like we could have like sort of some explicit way of setting it between the two behaviors, but then it'd be harder to remove later. Right now, it's like if we deprecate and remove that platform API, then that's the day we can rip out all the shell logic for real and like get in a place where we can have a 1.0 where there's no bash logic baked into the launcher. And if we didn't encapsulate it in the platform API, then that gives you some more options. But then there's more thought that needs to go into deprecating it. The other option here is that, at launch time, like right now we bake platform API environment variable into the image we're creating, and that changes platform API related things that happen at launch time. It could be viable. We would need to investigate it for users to be able to set that at launch time. So you could sort of like downgrade it and you get the older behavior. I think we need to look into like, would that work for everything else that's happening with the files baked into the image? Like we said that was possible in the past. Last time we changed the launcher interface, I think we need to evaluate that it's still possible in the future. So whole reason we're having this conversation, I just wanted to get a temperature check from people that are, building platforms about if this behavior change, how would that affect you? What would you like to see happen here, ideally?
That is very interesting, the last sort of option that you brought up, because I always felt like the launcher was this very weird, wrapper process that had a very specific interface, but the interface itself wasn't, an API, right? A contract of sorts. It is, but it isn't, right? And I think the mention that you made about an environment variable or something that you could pass to it to sort of determine its behavior, that actually seems ideal, right? Because as a platform, you expect, a certain interface with the launcher, with the final image that you're creating. I could bring up hypothetical scenarios, right, in which these cases might be affected. If you do have an end-to-end platform where you're building source code to an image and then running that image within that same platform, you might allow users to have a GUI interface to pass additional arguments. And that in itself might, hide the fact of like this double dash scenario and all that stuff. And that could very well potentially break, right? If they're doing something there. And the problem is we don't know what platforms may actually be using that sort of workflow.
Yeah. Like right now there is an environment, like the interface is defined in the platform spec, and there is an environment variable that will change its behavior, and it is the platform API.
We're saying that baked in. Are you able to override it in a sense at lunchtime?
You definitely can. I think the thing we haven't investigated fully is like if you build with one platform API and then try to launch with another, like are there gotchas there? Like does that actually work? Can they be the same variable? Like you can do it now and the launcher will try, but I don't know that we've ever recommended that anybody do that. So maybe that's the next step. We look into how feasible that is, because that can maybe just solve the problem here. And if it's not feasible, then we come back with a different independently variable thing if we need that. That definitely adds complexity though, so I don't want to do that unless we first need it from a technical perspective. Like if the platform API is good enough, just use that. But then also from a platform perspective, we don't want to be solving for a problem that people don't have and adding complexity, right?
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I think I see the attractiveness of having this sort of contract where you are able to pass in a platform API and it actually respects the behavior. But I understand the complexities behind it as well. the migration stuff.
It's always the most fun part of all of this. As a side note, I think we need to start making a deprecation. We need to start deprecating. Sorry, we need to start deprecating older platform APIs and making a plan to actually remove them so we can give Natalie a break on supporting everything under the sun in the lifecycle.
This is not the life cycle though.
The launcher is a part of the lifecycle.
I don't know. I mean, it seems weird because it's exposed to the end user. The life cycle is supposed to have a contract between the build pack API and the platform API, but it was never supposed to be exposed to the end user.
I guess it depends which end user. In this case, it's like you could have a platform in front of running the container if you want, right? It just so happens that most people don't feel the need to mediate that. It's like just run it.
But then it's leaking the build platform into the runtime platform.
Are you proposing, Sam, that we rethink and try to figure out a way to?
I'm not proposing anything. I'm just saying that like we've put ourselves in a situation where a part of the life cycle is app developer facing, and we've put a contract there in terms of how you pass arguments to it and the behavior it triggers in the launcher. And now we have deprecated and a part of the launcher API that's end user facing, like an app developer facing API. Like they expect those arguments to be interpolated by shell when passed in a certain way and not interpolated by shell when passed in a different way. And now we're introducing a third behavior where it will not be interpolated by shell, but it will substitute environment variables.
Yeah. So from your perspective and your use of the project, would it make it easier if it was like a separately configurable API versus the platform API? I guess I'm hoping that it'd be nice if you could build with one platform API and then maybe change it at launch and get whatever launch behavior you want so that we don't need to then think of a third API and the evolution and combinatorial overhead of people considering that.
So going back to this RFC, what's the point of this RFC to remove shell from the entirety of the lifecycle repository? Or was it to remove this shell from the build pack API?
From the entirety of lifecycle. I think it's always been a little bit weird that there's special shell behavior built in. You know, every time then we want to do something on Windows, it's like, what's the Windows version of this? It's weird that the lifecycle has a dependency on a specific version of bash. When, you know, maybe people want to use other shells. And then also, I feel like as people are driving towards more secure containers, if you can, it's great to create a runtime container that doesn't have bash in it at all. And then things start failing weirdly when the launch has like a direct bash behavior and it's the default, right?
I think a proper migration path for this would be to rename the launcher, like keep the launcher, the old launcher, which is symlinked as the launcher on the path, the same, and then have a new name that has the new behavior. So like people know what they're getting into, and then if they're using this new API, they're not calling it the launcher, they're calling it, I don't know, whatever, launcher v2 or whatever. I'm bad at naming, but whatever other name that has a proper app developer API, and then we can eventually transition people, because right now there's no transition path. If people start using the old launcher, I want to be able to throw a warning saying that this behavior has been deprecated. Please start calling this new binary name with these arguments passed in this way.
I don't know if we need another binary to do that though. Like
I'm not saying another binary, I'm just saying a different symlink name, and the behavior changes based on that. So like the same way we have different process types, just like, and launcher is one of those process types. I don't know, like not a process type, but like every process type is symlinked to the launcher and the behavior differs. So like this thing is just like something new. And if you invoke the launch directly, it says invoke this new thing instead with the parameters as shown. That's the only way I can see this working for our app developers properly. Like, especially considering the case where like they'll just rebuild the image, maybe with a new platform API. We have no way of knowing the difference between the images created by the old one or the new one easily. And then
Yeah, it's in there in an environment variable, but
yeah,
probably should be in like a label too and other things. Right. Maybe it is, but I don't know off the top of my head that it is.
yeah, but like that makes sure that people who have like K8s deployments or other things where the entry point is launcher, they get an appropriate warning and they're directed to a different one where they're passing variables in a slightly different fashion.
Wonder if we could roll out the part of this that isn't about user provided processes, but is about, argument handling on build pack provided processes, because I see that as being sort of within the build pack's control, and we can roll out the build pack API changes without touching the user provided processes, and then come back
I'm fine with that.
and yeah, think about the migration steps for the launcher more clearly. I both understand what you're saying and why, and kind of agree that it's necessary, but I also wish it was less complicated than that. And I think if we're doing something like that, we're going to need to plan it carefully.
Yeah. I think every time we merge an RFC, we should go through the spec, see all the changes it would need.
Yep.
And like if something is not reflected, we should make sure that like we talk about it during the RFC process, because I see this as like a big part of shell removal, but we just forgot about it. And I think at this point, we probably need another RFC to figure out how to deal with it.
Yeah. I think interestingly, this doesn't actually propose a change to user provided process.
Yeah, I see
it
entry
does.
point launcher. Yep.
So yeah, it is proposing a change, but I think we don't have to do all the things in this in one go. Like we could roll out just the build pack facing parts of this, and the argument handling parts of this, and then anything that bubbles through to the user, like the environment variable syntax and the removal of the dashes. Yeah, we could roll out separately.
Yep.
All right, well, more planning. When I wrote this, I felt like, yeah, I got all the migration steps for the build pack authors and the platform authors, but I missed some of the launcher ones. So in the past, we've just made the launcher changes in the platform API, and then people had questions and then they fixed their usage of it, but that was, earlier days when there were fewer users. So might have a broader impact this time.
Yep, this would be a big breaking change for us.
All right. Should we move on to our next topic? What do we got here? Natalie, want to talk about the Docker file spec PR? I think anytime we talk about Docker files, it can take the remainder of the time. So if we wanted to, do you know if the project scaffolding topic is a fast one or a slow one?
I can talk about it tomorrow in the BAT team meeting either. So
All
it's
right.
probably best to focus on the Docker file one.
All right, let's do the Dockerfile stuff then. Do you want to take it away, Natalie? The struggles of getting set up in the office. You're muted, I think, if you're talking to us.
Yeah, no, I was just complaining about all of my woes getting set up. I have my laptop on a pile of books right now. But let me share my screen. Where is it? Here. This one. So you can see GitHub. Oh no, I don't have it. Okay. So just to give an update, where are we with Docker files? This doesn't really show you anything, but basically, we had said that Docker files would roll out in phases, and the first phase would just allow extensions to provide a Docker file, a run.docker file that switches the base image that would be used during export. And so, we had a proof of concept. Now we have sort of real code that is making its way through the review process. And in the course of doing that, I've made some changes to the spec PRs that I wanted to go through, just kind of to surface, the things that I've learned and get feedback. So it probably makes sense to start with the platform. I don't know who, I know Javier left some comments, but what am I showing? Yeah, it's changed a little bit since I first opened this PR a couple months ago. So I just wanted to kind of go through those changes. And anyway, so the first sort of big change from when I showed the proof of concept is that I realized that we don't actually need a generator as far as like a separate entry point for the platform, because detect runs, you get a group of extensions, and then in user space, you can just run each of those extensions. Like detect does not require privileges, right? So generate does not require privileges, right? An extension, so an extension has a bin detect, just like a build pack, and it has a bin generate, which is similar to a build pack's bin build. And then you have the extender that comes in and takes the generated Docker files and applies them. That requires privileges, but the actual extension doesn't, right? So to make it easier on platforms, and just for everybody, I thought, okay, the detector can just take some extra arguments, right? It needs an analyze toml, right? Because we need a place to put the new run image when we determine what it should be. It needs a directory containing extensions. It needs, I discussed this further down, but it needs like an output file containing metadata describing what was generated. And then this, I just thought would be nice to like actually get the Docker files. If you want to look at them, you need to put them somewhere that the platform could save them off. So any initial reactions, or should I keep going? All right, I'll keep going. So here, is where I describe what each of these, what I just did, describe what each of those are for. And maybe it makes sense at this point to just kind of look at the schema changes as well, because you're kind of stepping through what a platform is providing and what it's getting back. I wanted to show those, so let me just scroll down to the bottom. And I know Javier had some comments, but so the first would be, a platform as its entry point is going to provide the order toml. Right now, it would provide a order that just contains build packs. and an order that just contains extensions. So this order for extensions, you can think of it as like a meta build pack for extensions, right? It's just going to be placed in front of every build pack group when we run detect. And we see if we can resolve a valid build plan by doing that. After detect runs, you then get 2 files, right? You get your plan, which now is going to contain this. In the providers, you're going to have a field to tell you whether that provider is an extension or not. This is like in the case that a build pack and an extension share the same ID, you want to disambiguate between them. So we have that. And then we have a group where currently you just get one group and it has a bunch of things in it. And those things can either be build packs or extensions. Javier had the suggestion that you could have a separate group for extensions, which I think is nice because you have a separate order for extensions. So like that parity feels good. But I would need to update the code to reflect that. So you're going to get these as outputs of detect no matter what. And then if the extension's detected, you will run bin generate for each of the extensions in order, and the output will be this generated toml, where I was actually thinking today, instead of this kind equals run, it might be nice to group them by run and build so that, you know, you can say, oh, do I have any build Docker files? Oh, I don't even need to run extender on my build image, or like, you know, anyway, so this schema I think could be made better, but the idea is to say what happened, right? What Docker files actually got generated, the extension that did it, and the path to find it. And then finally, the output directory, as I mentioned, would contain those actual files. I want to say that's, please give me feedback.
A couple of questions. You're talking about like if an extension in a build pack has the same ID, disambiguating. Do we want to allow that? Like I could imagine we might run into other places where we get mad at ourselves for having these two things have the same ID. Would it be easier just to try to forbid it from the get-go?
I was thinking quite the opposite. I think it goes with this idea of that we're conflating extensions and build packs. Like I think they should be able to live like completely separate from each other. So like even if you go down to the spec part, sorry, the files, there was a file where you made that comment specifically. Yeah, like right there, right? Like everything before that says API, build pack API version, build pack version, build pack homepage, build pack ID, right? Now you got to say build pack or extension ID, build pack or extension homepage. And it just feels like it's going to add a lot more confusion than saving, you know, a few different namespaces. So I don't know the reasoning behind it, but it feels like just from a outsider's point of view that they either are the same thing or they're completely separate. And I thought we had agreed that they'd be completely separate.
Thought about this a little bit. Right now, like you don't have to worry. There's no point at which they would collide. But an earlier version of the RFC proposal said that extensions should be able to provide SBOM files. And that would have been a problem because we copy it to layers SBOM build pack ID, right? And in that case, like, you know, sorry, we only have one spot. But
can you not put it in a different namespace?
You could, yeah. I mean, you could. That's
extension / extension ID.
Yeah. We just like trim that from the RFC, so it's like not a problem, but it's solvable if it were.
Yeah, I think trying to prevent those from colliding is actually the wrong approach, right? Again, wherever we use build pack ID, we should be talking about a build pack. We should never try to think of it, is it a build pack or an extension? I think if we're having to think about that, it's just going to create a lot of confusion.
You gonna say something, Sam?
No, I was, yeah. We got rid of that whole S1 thing from extensions anyway, so doesn't matter.
Would we ever want to put them in a registry? Right now, registry is just for build packs. I don't think there's a desire to do extensions in the registry, but that's another area where you might want IDs to be global. I'm kind of okay with them being scoped to different things. Like we can migrate the registry to have build packs in one section, extensions in another. Just trying to throw out all the questions here. And then the other question I had when going through this is about the generated file. I feel like for a lot of similar things, we kind of use like a directory structure to encode that information and like file names, or then we use like files that then reference things with paths. Maybe we want to do this instead because it's better than our directory structure API, but if we just wanted to limit inputs and files and things to think about, like, is there a world where we don't need this, but instead we just, like write all the extensions to a path that includes the extension ID, or, maybe start with numbers so you know what order to run them in, that kind of thing.
We would know the order. So as you're speaking, I'm thinking, but we would know the order based on the group already, right? And the way this proposes that the output directory, oh gosh, I don't think I put it, but like it would be, I need to make this more explicit, but it would be, output directory, and then it would kind of mimic the way that layers SBOM works, right? So it'd be like output generated, maybe run, extension ID, and then there'd be a Docker file in there. So you could do away with generated.toml. You just have group.toml in the directory structure. I like it.
Yeah. I mean, not to throw more onto that sort of fire, because I think we're on the same page, but I think the path was also a little bit awkward. I didn't know if that was a relative or absolute path, and whether or not be any sort of, I don't think we do that anywhere else. So that, I think that would have brought upon something to think about as well.
I will change that. That's a good. I think we have covered, let me just make sure. So, okay, so I would prefer that we maybe come back and have a separate focused discussion about how to properly designate things as experimental, because I think we could, go all over the place with different ways, but I'm trying to call out, what is experimental and what's not. And, we need to tell platform operators how to enable this behavior, but I think that we have probably enough to talk about with the actual feature itself. So I maybe circle back around and come back to that one. The only other thing that I wanted to call out here is that, the run image that the analyzer writes into analyze.toml is a digest, and the generate phase doesn't have registry credentials, so you can't provide a digest, but it's sort of.
Is this the point where we really start to regret moving analyze before detect?
Yeah, it honestly, in the newer platform APIs, analyzer, all it does is verify registry access. That's all it does. It literally, none of the meta, I mean, yeah. So maybe,
That is nice because like for end users, like one of the things that sucks is if you waste a lot of time running something only to find out you don't have permission to read the images. But I do think we probably need to resolve the run image down to a digest because otherwise there can be like race conditions and weirdness. Right.
but that would always be the case, right? Like the extent. So what happens after the generate phase? You build, then you export. At no point did you actually like read anything off of the run image until the export phase, right? The only time it would be important to know the digest is when you're going to start to mutate the run image, at which point the extender still doesn't have registry credentials, but the platform could provide that information.
Yeah, I think at the end of extender, we need to like lock the output down to a digest, right? And you can imagine cases where we, thinking about some of the proposals for how to roll out like stack removal, like we may, at least in the case where we're not running these extensions, there's labels that are suggested that we need to read, or we need to read things about the image. It's like, what's the OS version? What's the platform? So we can check compatibility with the build packs, right? So to like get this all working in a non-experimental way, we probably need to be able to do that with whatever comes out of extender, which should be easier than the case where that's all mix-ins, but
Could we look again, Natalie, at the new flags that
Yeah.
were added? So generated would be not the output, because that's where you place the Docker files. That would be an output directory / generated.
Yeah.
And so the generated flag here means what? Sorry.
That was supposed to be just like analyzed. If like, here's my path to analyze TOML. Generated would be like the path to the file. But if we get rid of that, then
Oh, I see.
this
Yeah.
this could become generated, like generated dir, just like layers is layers dir. But I have to say, just selfishly, it just pains me to have like a CNB output generated dir, and then I know later we're going to want like a CNB output, report dir or something. Like I just thought CNB output dir was just cleaner, and then we'll make generated a child of that directory and thank ourselves later.
Yeah, I think as long as you understand the file structure at the end, right? Yeah. So I was actually going to, before I guess we remove generator, I was actually going to propose the same thing for the lifecycle. Instead of there being an analyzed file and a generated file, what if you just give it a directory and be like, here, lifecycle, put all your crap here, right? Because the platforms don't actually care for those files.
Yeah, I think this gets into like an RFC Jesse had a long time ago about sort of like overhauling this file structure and having fewer moving parts here. I think what you're saying about the output, Natalie, like really resonates with me, but I feel like we have it to some level and it has the unfortunate name of layers.
Yeah.
Like, do we just want to like put this in the layers dir? Because it's nice for platforms to be like mount one volume to the one place. And we could like, the workspace could have been in there by default unless someone wants to do something different. Like we could have had a much simpler set of flags where it's just like, give me a volume. I do things in the volume. Don't worry about it.
I think there's a counter to be said there if you wanted to break that into multiple sort of volumes, right? Like if you wanted the contents within that to be broken up into different volumes for different reasons, or because you wanted to add, like let's say if we put order into that layers, which it is, right? But like if you didn't have an option to then say an order path, then that becomes impossible, right?
Yeah. I just like the idea of sort of like defaulting everything. And we've moved to this in a lot of places. Or we have this with Analyze, right? We're actually already kind of doing it. Most of the defaults are paths in layers. So you can specify these flags.
Yeah, and CNB output
Yeah.
dir does default to layers. So,
Yeah. Maybe we want a subdirectory of layers there for.
Oh, yeah. But then later.
Like layers, extensions, layers, Docker files.
So that's incumbent upon the. Oh, I was saying, okay, I can move around where I describe the child directory, but yeah, so that's what I was thinking. So later, what if we're like, we like this CNB output dir concept, we want to use it like for another phase. I guess we could just say it has a different default in that case, and that would work. I was just like a little bit future thinking here, like just ever so slightly trying to sneak in something that might make it easier down the road. But if we don't like it,
like separate it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think as long as the default is something in layers, which I like, I'll admit, didn't notice the first time we were going through it, then I'm actually totally fine with it. That we have these options, but it all defaults to being within this one volume, and everyone already knows to mount the one volume. So the default is simple. I think you would feel better probably if we had user-facing documentation for the life cycle. Because I feel like when you come into this, everyone's like, whoa, I need so many things. But the truth is, like, most of the defaults are fine and you only need a couple things.
Yeah. And then that being said, similar to what we did with order TOML, you could always add a flag for anything that people may request to be movable within that output directory.
I do want to give us time to look at the build pack API changes. I mean, the platform, to be honest, is kind of like the easier one. But the build pack one, I think there would probably be some feedback both on the content, like the actual like technical language here, as well as kind of the style, because I found it a little funky. I'll just point out, like, the platform spec doesn't make mention of a generate phase like as a distinct entry point, but I think for the build pack spec, it does make sense. And this is just a whole lot of changes, but I'll also point out that I'm going to update the terminology because this is using an old attempt to describe a build pack that is not a meta build pack, which we're also not using anymore. But I think the like actual hard, questions are kind of buried in this sea of word changes. I don't know how much we'll be able to get to here, but I could maybe go through and like highlight them if that would be helpful to reviewers to say, here's where I really need your feedback on the technical questions, although it mostly reflects what's in the RFC. Yeah, I don't know. I think the part where there's a lot of complexity is around the order resolution, right? Because that process is just hard to understand in general, and now it's made even harder by the addition of a different type of thing that has its own unique place in that process. But I think this is the meat of it, right? That is prepended to the order definition.
I have to think harder about this. I'm like, is it the order definition for the build pack, or is it the order in It's the platform's order, right? I feel like when you're talking about the order resolution and the build pack spec, it's about how like the build pack's order can be expanded, but then it also applies to the order toml and it's not in the right place. And it's like, oh, my brain hurts. I need to read it more carefully. If only we had cleaned up the spec. That's what we say all the time.
I'll just point out the one piece. Sorry, okay. Yeah, so this is the image extension. So basically, we said that image extensions they're like build packs, except they're not build packs, but they're like build packs, right? So it's this kind of weird relationship that they have. And so what I have done is I pulled out a separate file just to describe the image extensions, but it says, hey, I go along with this build pack API version, and it points back to the build pack spec where applicable. So it basically just calls out all the ways that image extensions are different from build packs. This was one thing that I inferred from the RFC, but wasn't written like explicitly. I think Stephen had written that when you're missing a bin build, you should treat the extension root directory as like just pre-populated and grab the Docker files that might be there already. And I thought, okay, if you're missing a bin detect, the RFC does say that you should be assumed to pass detection, but hey, why not have a pre-populated plan toml, right? With all the things that you require, that you provide, right? So that made sense to me. I added that in the implementation in the spec change. This is like, okay, you have a different binary name. You get an output directory, not to be confused with the platform output directory, although they are the same. It's just specifying it to build packs instead of 2 platforms. And then the lifecycle, if it's pre-populated, the lifecycle will copy the Docker file out of the root directory into the output directory that was provided. And that's it, pretty much. So I don't know. I just like really at this point, just to kind of summarize where we are. We have some PRs that are making their way through the review process. We are planning to ship this in a real API, but as an experimental feature that platforms have to opt into. And I'm anticipating that we'll have a lifecycle release candidate binary just sort of out there, and would be looking for feedback on that before actually shipping the spec and the lifecycle itself. And one other thing that I've been thinking about, which is, okay, let's say we put that lifecycle release candidate out there. I think we were also talking yesterday about, really pack being the main place that people would want to experiment with it, right? Those where it's most useful. Can we have like a pre-release version of pack that consumes a pre-release version of the life cycle, right? Because without a pack that can do this, then how are you going to try this out?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like you want the create builder part of pack to work here, or you can't really use it, and then you need it to use the new API. It's like too annoying to do it directly with the lifecycle. So I agree with that. I think it would be very valuable.
I might add some pack issues and try to pick those up in tandem with this lifecycle getting, released. Any other comments or questions?
all this talking about it, it's exciting to see us getting close to something. It's like, oh, we're gonna have a pack RC with the lifecycle RC that you can use to actually run extensions. It's pretty exciting.
And then just to speak a little bit further about, like, because I mentioned the different phases, right? Like phase one, this is the easiest part, right? You just switch the run image. I think the next sort of easiest one will be to extend the build image, like in container, right? You don't have to pull it or push it anywhere. You just execute the Docker files and then run build packs. I think that would be the next milestone to tackle. The extending of the run image is going to be hard. It will be easier in pack because you have a daemon to work with, but in a Kubernetes environment or elsewhere, we're going to need to do some stuff to get the run image, like basically into the registry, or potentially pull in new run images if they're referenced by Docker files. So it's just a little messy. And I anticipate that that will take longer. But there you have it.
The thing that still gives me a little bit of heartburn here is just like any arbitrary run image. It's like, to what extent is that going to work with all of our other stack stuff and goals? Like I know at one point we discussed like selecting from a list, but maybe once we have this experimental feature, then we can see like how we feel about it and whether we need to be more restrictive about which run images you can select.
Yeah, I mean, in the testing I've been doing, I've been generally using an image that was a valid run image because selecting from any image is great, but then you end up with images that don't have any other labels on them that you expect for a stack run image. Like if it's missing the CNB user ID and group ID, M variables in the image you pick, then obviously things don't work very well at runtime. But yeah, so I think there's some of that. But I think on the other hand, when you're talking about you're wary over it because there'll be multiple run images possible. Well, it's only going to get worse once we start allowing the run image to be modified by the Docker file and allowing the builder image to be modified by the Docker file. But they're all things that need to happen if we're able to install dependencies via apt or via RPM. So we've got to figure out how to deal with them somehow.
Yeah. It's like when you're running a Docker file, like all bets are off, anything could happen, right? But if you're at least starting from a valid run image, there's like, I feel like less danger of things going off the rails,
Yeah, and I think it's one of those ones that it's Spider-Man quote, isn't it? Great power comes great responsibility. Once you get the Docker file capability, yes, you can absolutely shoot yourself in both feet simultaneously. But on the other hand, if you're careful, you can actually achieve great things and still maintain rebaseability. And it's just a matter of being cautious about what you do and understanding the implications.
I think it will really matter like how we talk about this feature. Like I think I see its power sort of like most clearly in the case where you're like having a smart system installing runtimes from RPMs or selecting from different, base images that are already built. I think we should be careful about like trying to lean into this as like an escape hatch for the masses, like do any random thing. Cause I feel like the chances of all of that working out correctly, it might just cause more pain than gain.
Yeah, I mean, there's great potential for disaster. There's no two ways about it, because once we start allowing the customization in the Docker files beyond just the run image switch, what if they do change CNB user ID to something completely daft? What if they replace all of the CNB lifecycle binaries with something else? You're
on your own now.
Exactly, but I think that's kind of acceptable in a way because it does provide it. I mean, the alternative was going back to the stack pack stuff that was 2 years ago. So, yeah. And that was in some ways more restrictive in what it allowed to happen because you didn't have the opportunity to switch images. You only had the opportunity to execute root level commands on existing run or builder images. But we're this far down this path, and I don't really want to have to go backwards now because.
No, I'm not suggesting that we go backwards. It's more of a suggesting a concerted messaging strategy that
Mhm.
encourages responsible use.
I think some of that will come down to, once it leaves experimental, how we document this. If we provide examples that show, these are the kind of scenarios that we thought this would be needed for. Here are some simple examples that show this being used to solve that problem. Please note, you can go off and do whatever you like with it, but bear in mind that here are some downfalls we can think of. There are many, many, many more. Off you go, and see where people get to.
All right, everyone, we're over time. Thank you so much.